Hello, and thank you for taking the time to view our webinar session, Retail Omni-Intelligence, Leveraging Analytics to Combine Customer Experience Insights with Supply Chain Operations to Boost Satisfaction and Performance. This webinar was produced by Aberdeen Strategy Research and brought to you by Oracle. This session is pre-recorded, so we encourage you to reach out if you have any questions. Contact information will be provided at the conclusion of the webinar. Joining us today are Brian Ball, Vice President and Group Director, Supply Chain, GSM, Finance, and ERP Practices at Aberdeen. Sarah Gaffney, Senior Analyst, Research Data and Operations at Aberdeen. Michael Forjes, Global Managing Director at Oracle's Industry Strategy Group. And Jose Villacis, Head of Product Marketing at Oracle Analytics. Now I'll turn it over to Brian to get started.
Welcome to our panel, Sarah Gaffney, Michael Forjes, and Jose Villacis. And I would like to talk about what we're going to cover today briefly before we jump into it. I'm going to orchestrate some of it as an MC, and then my colleague Sarah is going to take part of it as well, and then I'll come back towards the end, and we'll wrap up. But we're going to cover if you will, the disruptions, the change in the customer, what we mean by omni-intelligent retail, where the supply chain fits, and then show you some of the benefits at the end. And we're looking for a lively discussion here, so please bear with us. But to get things started, we want to talk about some things that are top of mind. And for retail, disruptions are, I would think, in most everybody's mind. No surprise that the pandemic tops the list over the last year. But if you had to take a look, the port congestion right now, I would suggest that that's probably number 2 or 3 and moved up on the list just in the last 30, 60 days. And so let me just toss it over to Michael and Jose, how you guys see this and what your customers are telling you. Is this pretty much their focus right now?
I've spent a lot of time meeting with major consumer goods suppliers and their retailer partners, and it's quite clear that the disruption of the market, specifically the supply chain, relate to everything from raw materials shortage, labor shortages, even pallets. I'm hearing are not as available as we might have been able to get in the past. So there's just a whole host of issues that are now impacting the supply chain. We have trucks that are waiting to be filled. We have ships that are sitting on, in Oakland in the sea, and of course, consumers also have their needs needing to be fulfilled. So they feel the constraint of that, and they see those out of stock conditions, and then their reaction to this is, oh my gosh, we don't have enough of everything, which of course creates the effect of hoarding. And we're going to get into this in a little bit, I think, down in the conversation.
Indeed. One of the things that surprised me quite a bit was a statistic I read just a few days ago about our ports in the US that right now only 34% of ships are able to deliver on time, which is significantly lower. And that was for the month of September, and that was significantly lower than the prior years or prior months. And so this is putting a lot of strain and stress into retailers because, as Michael mentioned, what we're hearing is that retailers have pressure from the consumer side in trying to understand how to best serve those customers, how to ensure customer satisfaction, but at the same time, how to manage suppliers, how to manage all this disruption, and how to get products to those consumers in time. So, indeed, it's a double force that is affecting them, Brian.
So let me ask the question. One of the things that hits me is, in many cases, the product is there, but they obviously have run into some other issues. So, would visibility help, improving visibility and help, just in terms of the disruptions alone? Do you see that as a factor?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Because the whole point is you don't have anymore the luxury of time. So visibility by itself is hugely important, but it's also how soon can you understand what's going on and how soon, therefore, can you react. So understanding inventory levels in conjunction with demand and the changes in demand and managing those inventories and all of that becomes extremely important now because you have less time to react. And if you don't have enough visibility and enough understanding of what happened and then also what could happen, then we end up in these problems of delayed reactions or that strategies tend or tactics tend to change too late. So understanding, for example, costing and fulfillment at granular detail and being able to project that become very strategic factors for retailers.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up on that. Do you see that they've got those tools and capabilities in place now? Or is that something that you think really needs some help or some work or enhancement?
Oh, I do believe, based also on our conversations with our customers, organizations that are interested in the technology, and the increase of interest, that there is a great need to organize, structure, and simplify the technology that helps them do that. Because there's also this very intense or specific shift to trying to serve a customer as opposed to trying to sell something alone. So those elements that are fulfilled correctly with the technology in terms of visibility of efficiency and performance of the supply chain, or a thorough understanding of inventory valuation turns, and ultimately the reduction of overall risk, whether it is supply chain risk, fulfillment risks, and so forth, rely on having an integrated platform that can get you to that point. And so, to summarize, the need for the technology, the need for consolidation of technology platforms into reliable cloud architectures, those things are increasing more and more. So, definitely, it is something that is top of mind and has jumped up as a strategic initiative more than before for retailers in the different areas. Michael, do you have any other comments from other companies that you've interacted with?
Yeah, I want to target this conversation of what is there, because what's interesting to note, and I think we'll probably get into this in a few more minutes, right, is the conditions under which the industry operate exist for the sake of the industry. Now that's a little bit hard for some people to understand necessarily, or more to the point, accept that supplier and retailers exist to fulfill for each other's requirements, and the consumer is the end result of an entire process from raw manufacture, from distribution and warehousing, from the back room to the shop floor, where presumably the consumer makes a purchase decision. We need to reconcile that the closed loop that exists between manufacturer and retailer is no longer sufficient to ensure days of supply. And even understanding what I need to ship as against what you need in your back room doesn't tell us much about who the consumer is and what they need. And so I'd like to see a shift in the conversation that exists not between trading partners by themselves, but taking into consideration who the shopper is, who the household is, who the individual is, what their need states are. And because that is, frankly, what we're in the business of when you really get down to it.
Okay, thanks for that. I think when we cover some of the supply chain things, we may get into that a little bit more. But at least for now, I mean, this is the disruptions are top of mind, and there's a lot of things that flow into that. I want to maybe shift gears a little bit and turn this over to Sarah and let her address, if you will, the sort of the second major thing that has happened, or top of mind. In addition to the disruptions, it's what about the changes in the consumer that have occurred as a result of the pandemic? Sort of as two entry points here to the discussion. So, Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Brian. So, in our most recent customer experience survey, we asked our respondents about the pressures influencing their customer experience initiatives. And we found that retailers were aligned with many of the other organizations in our study in feeling a shift where consumers are now driving the narrative. The main pressure I want to point out here is the third one here on the slide, that consumers now have an access to a wealth of information regarding products and competitors, which is changing the dynamic of customer relationships. With the ability to research and compare different products, costs, feature sets, quality, and reviews across competing brands, the consumer has more information to make decisions. And the availability of this information is changing their decisions. It's altering their behavior, and retailers need to keep up with those changing customer behavior patterns to accurately meet customer needs. Other top pressures include consumers expecting consistent experiences across different touch points, needing to expend less effort to get their needs addressed, and the proliferation of new customer engagement channels. All of these pressures demonstrate the shift in the narrative where consumers are now in the driver's seat. They decide what products to buy, how and where to buy them, and how to interact with retailers and service representatives. And this shift is a result of the new habits that these consumers have adopted over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, where they want and need more options for everything. More options for how to buy, whether that's online or in stores, more options for how to receive in person, curbside, or delivery, and more options for how to get their needs addressed with different channels like phone or messaging apps. They now feel empowered and in control of their retail experience. Which brings us to the role of the empowered consumer. Michael and Jose, is this how, in your experience, retailers see the role of the consumer right now? And do they have the technologies in place to monitor changes in customer behavior, to meet them where they're at and provide them the right options at the right time?
So I think, Sarah, you just articulated that quite well. I think that what we have to understand and appreciate is that, and I was speaking about this a moment ago, the degree to which the industry has been focused on doing what it does better every day. And so there's decades of performance capability that's been enhanced, but that's incrementalism, frankly. What we've come to realize in this fragile universe that we find ourselves in right now is just how difficult it is to get product to market on time to those who need it. And it's not and we don't have the luxury of warehouses full of product the way we used to. So you're seeing a domino effect. There's not enough raw material. There are not enough people to manufacture it. There aren't enough people to ship it. There aren't enough people to merchandise it. And there are lots of consumers who need it. And when you put all that together, and especially when you do that across the globe, not in isolated situations, you realize the degree to which those interdependencies find themselves under a great deal of stress. I think this idea of the empowered consumer is something that we necessarily have to latch onto. Who are they in the matter of what they need, and when do they need it? And their ability now is enhanced in transmitting that information because they're operating online, they're enrolled in loyalty programs, and so forth. And so if we're listening, if we're actually paying attention, the consumer will tell us what they want and when. And rather than this push pull, in other words, I make lots of stuff, I sell lots of stuff, presumably they'll come and get it. Maybe we need to understand better what they need so that we can provide that to them in a more timely, efficacious manner. Jose?
The implications on analytics of this empowered consumer are vast. And let me emphasize on this. Because what happens is that most organizations today have a wealth of information, a wealth of data from different sources, vendors, suppliers, their internal systems, and they have a lot. And many have been successful putting together some types of reports and dashboards that help them look at that information. But here is where the reality hits us. Most organizations are what I would call at a stage of being report driven. And many organizations talk about becoming data driven. But that's where the problem lies. If you're data driven, you're always looking at data. Of course, it's important, but you're looking at the past. You're not being able to look at exactly how are these trends changing? What's the influence or the impact of now empowered consumers and their needs, their wants, having on your demand, on your product mix, and your ability to fulfill their orders to meet their needs. Therefore, we have to shift into what I call an analytics driven state. What does that mean from the technology perspective? It means that retailers have to understand that it's not enough just to look at the past and be data driven. You have to become analytics driven. In other words, try to understand what is likely going to happen. Use your analytics, use your technology, apply new technologies, modern methods, whether it is machine learning, natural language processing, different types of technologies that can help you within your analytics platform to understand what's likely going to happen as you incorporate all of these types of data into your process. So, in summary, without getting too much into the tech side of the house, having a wealth of information, a wealth of data from the compared to the past is not enough. Making decisions on that is not enough. You have to become analytics driven and look at what may happen because otherwise your decisions are going to be outdated. And specifically, I'll give a very short example of some of the latest trends you were touching on, Michael, about, for example, loyalty programs and the differences today with sentiment analysis, or how popular NPS scores have become everywhere in terms of how do you measure and try to understand what is the sentiment of those consumers now with respect to your fulfillment capabilities, with respect to product placement, with respect to the purchasing experience. In the past, loyalty programs were a little bit outdated, just focusing on recency and frequency, sort of incidental. And that's very different today. So if you don't consider all these factors and you don't have the right technology, it would be very difficult for you to become analytics driven and really understand what could happen. So hopefully this gives the perspective of what are the implications of all of this into how retailers have to prepare themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely. And going along with that theme of becoming analytics driven and that need to keep up with changing customer needs and even predict demand based on those changes, we at Aberdeen have looked at our data from the perspective of Omni-Intelligence. And we've defined Omni-Intelligent Retail to be the application of analytics technologies such as AI, machine learning, predictive intelligence, and real-time customer analytics to data, both structured and unstructured, in context to evaluate customer and operational behavior and take action. Retailers should be looking to optimize the complete customer experience and operational efficiency from pre order to post order, which is only possible if they have visibility and insight into real time consumer and operational behavior. In short, Omni Intelligence is having the technology to be aware of what's going on inside your four walls and outside of them. It's also worth noting that best in class retailers have invested in these omni intelligent technology enablers. Aberdeen defines best in class companies as the top 20% of organizations based on their performance in key business metrics. These top performers are more likely to adopt artificial intelligence, machine learning, and business intelligence than all other companies, which is the bottom 80%. And this indicates that these top performers see value in these technologies to support their customer experience and supply chain operations. With machine learning algorithms, retailers can identify patterns in customer behavior and supply chain performance to be proactive and gain insight into situations before they occur. The best in class are ahead on the investment side, but the question is, do the retailers see this investment in analytics as a priority, as well as the need to gain insights into the behavior of their empowered consumers? Michael and Jose, does this coincide with how Oracle views the need for analytics in the retail industry and the positioning of your solutions?
Well, the first thing I'd say is it's not so much that Oracle's position, it's the industry that's taking the position. We have evolved considerably from the early days. Jose, you brought it up before, recency and frequency and monetary value. And Sarah, you just mentioned the 80%, things like decile analysis, which is great for quantifying who the shopper is, but it doesn't necessarily qualify how they feel. What they're going through at any given moment, which is not static and doesn't necessarily have the kind of scoring that we're used to. I would also suggest that those loyalty programs, which framed that notion of the consumer, were really set up as a means to their own ends. In other words, loyalty isn't one direction. It's not what I can get from you. It's how do I serve you more appropriately. And if we're listening, the consumer will tell us that. In fact, that's exactly what's happened during the period of the COVID, when consumers said, or shoppers or households said, for the sake of security and the well-being of my household, I'm not going to go to a store 2.3 times a week. I'm going to use some combination of direct to home, BOPIS, buy online, pick up in store, perhaps lockers, other means to ends, which ensure the sanctity of the home and protect me. And so I don't think that's ever going to be lost, even when we come through the other side of the COVID. Shoppers, households, individuals are starting to come to terms with the fact that they can get what they want when they want it. And running off to the store every other day may not be either the best answer or the best use of my time. And therefore, I'm expecting, I'm in fact demanding that my retailers and the direct to serve consumer products companies that also are doing D2C, that they respond to my need states, not their need states. What do you think, Jose? I think we've been talking about this for a little while. I know you have a somewhat
Exactly.
varied.
It's interesting, and I think I can use an example to illustrate how all of this becomes very, as I was saying earlier, a very strategic issue, but also a very realistic situation about the limitations that we may have and that we may not be aware of in terms of how can we achieve that with our technology today. For example, today we have many organizations have the ability to understand, say, sales orders, on time shipment percentages, or questions like that, or how are we fulfilling our orders, or what's the cost of our inventory. But are we able to understand completely the valuation of our inventory? And if we have work in progress inventory, if it comes from a manufacturing perspective, or if it relates to what is in shipment, what's in transit. But that's not enough, right? It is about also understanding and coupling that, not just with the demand levels that you've been able to project based on historical data, but how is that influenced by sentiment analysis, or influencer trends. All of these things that I have just rattled off are typically obtained from data that is structured data that fits in columns and rows, and unstructured data that comes in a non-pre-formatted fashion. It could be comments, it could be tweets, it could be other types of indicators, it could be sensor information. All of these things mean that we have to have the technology to combine effectively structured information, semi-structured information, and unstructured data. All of these require a technology foundation that most of you may have heard already in the form of data lakes or lake houses today. But if we don't understand what that means, in summary, it implies having the ability to combine all this data, put it in the right form, and then present it to those decision makers, people that are wanting to make changes or apply strategies or tweak them in very little time. But if all of that work is not there, if all of that platform, if you would, is not there, then how are you able to do it? You may approximate things using spreadsheets or something like that. And that is a typical problem that we face. We may have the strategies and the thoughts and process, but we're not able to apply it because our technologies don't allow us to do that. So, in summary, the combination of different types of data from all these disparate sources, from our internal systems, from our suppliers, from unstructured data and social media and other types of surveys. I mentioned earlier NPS surveys or sentiment analysis surveys. All of that allows us then to become analytics driven. And that's the challenge that we face. So hopefully I've been able to illustrate a little bit more where the crunch really is, because many of these things are known and might be obvious for retailers that are innovating a lot, but do they have the ability to apply it? And that's the challenge.
Thanks for that, Jose and Michael. Brian will now tackle the next section on closing the loop with analytics for supply and demand balancing.
Thanks, Sarah. Before I actually jump into that, just a quick follow up. Um, on the say the technology adoption and the concept of omni-intelligent. And Michael, back to your comment, both of you really, but the fact that the retailer has been successful, historically, performing better in the things they do well, is the realization there, with the new consumer, control, if you will, or empowered consumer, is the realization there, or is it still sinking in a little bit that there's a need to shift more from where they've been to this sort of the new combination of data, structured and unstructured? Has it really, or is there some resistance to it? And I'm asking, out of curiosity, really. So,
Yeah, I don't know that I would use the word resistance. I think there's recognition. I think that the industry is by degrees moving in this direction. I think that that was hastened by the COVID. Let's be clear, the digitization of commerce had been taking place for quite a long time beyond before the COVID arrived. The ascension of platforms has made it very clear that the store is not the only place to procure. What happened in the space of 18 months drove this industry faster than would have been the case before the COVID. I think that most people realize, most of the industry realizes that what would have taken maybe 2 to 5 years has happened in a fraction of that time. And that pace of acceleration, the technological adaptation and adoption by both the retailer, the supplier, and the consumer has hastened that change. I think it's a very exciting time for retailers and manufacturers who have, you use the word, so I'll use it, resisted or have been non-committal. They're going to be faced with some significant headwinds when we come out of this in the next 12 to 18 months. For those companies who have taken advantage of the moment to imagine new ways to serve, they're going to be at the forefront of a new era doing the kind of work in a way that's more appropriate to our era for our times.
I would agree, and I think the degree of adoption of, in general, just cloud technologies, Brian, is also helping that, because as the experience with these technologies and the simplicity and simplification of all of these processes when it comes to shifting, improving, enhancing technological platforms, uh, has become more, or becomes more and more, a reality for retailers, then things start to change. The key is who can take these steps faster or quicker. Um, because I feel that there is a recognition and less resistance, as you were saying, but a recognition that it is a must. It's not an option anymore. However, it is who is willing to, as I said, take the steps to make that a reality faster. And if you think about other factors like the adoption of what in the industry is called edge technologies or sensors technologies, or new or different types of technologies that can help us better understand the consumer and also better manage our supply chains, such as location information, geographic information, or delivery truck data through dash cams, driver cams, telematics, and then also delivery confirmations, online or mobile devices to track and confirm deliveries. To all of these technologies require a different way to think about compared to the traditional ones. How do you transfer that data? How do you store it? And then how do you use it? And that is very quickly forcing everyone in the retail industry to rethink those strategies. However, again, as Michael was saying, those that can quickly adapt, those that can quickly embrace it, are the ones that will be ahead, the best in class.
it sounds like we're in for some exciting times then. moving forward, and a bit of a race to who can get there first with the best. And but that leads me to the supply chain discussion. And I think there also needs to be some further improvement, if you will. But I want to talk about some specifics here. Um, One of them is on the forecast accuracy, and the best in class are substantially ahead. And anecdotally, I would suggest that there needs to be an aspirational goal here to get somewhere into the low 90s. And in other words, we've heard that that's doable in certain use cases. Not trying to say that's common across the board, but the best in class are somewhere in the 85% range nominally, if you will, but they're substantially ahead of their competition. The other key one is the third bullet down, which is the supply demand match. And if the disruptions have taught us anything, the supply demand match typically focuses on product, but I'd suggest that that needs to shift a little bit to the entire capacity of the supply chain, which would mean the things I think you brought them up, Michael. It could be containers, it could be port capacity, it could be ships, it could be any number of things that are the third party extensions to what the supply chain consists of. It's beyond product in other words. So when you evaluate that supply demand match, it needs to be a little broader. So I also put in there the second one, which is if we're going to do the supply demand match, having a holistic view is pretty important. In other words, if I don't have the data that tells me this is the model for the whole supply chain, then I'm going to be missing some of the pieces that I need to talk about, so or discuss or evaluate. So, just a couple thoughts on that. But I'd like to turn this over to you guys and see if this makes sense with how you see it. One is in the customer demand, improving that signal, and then secondly, the ability to through analytics to get to that good supply demand match.
Well, I think Jose has done a really great job of explaining the interplay between supplier and manufacturer. So if I may defer to him to begin that conversation, I think that would be useful. And then maybe I can pick up from the other side of what our purpose is, if that's okay with you, Jose.
Absolutely, sure. I like to again try to turn it into more tangible, realistic examples of not only what we see with our existing customers, but those organizations that come and talk to us about where are their primary pains. I would say that at the top level, we have three key requirements that relate to this angle of the supply chain planning and execution. One of them is how can I improve my strategic sourcing? How can I better manage my suppliers would be the second one. And then improve the efficiency of the procurement processes, all in conjunction with uh, matching or adapting that with demand signals. But if you don't take care of these three top elements or three top areas, then you're going to have a hard time fulfilling that demand, even if you're able to, or you have that demand side and sentiment analysis angles covered. Let me give you some specific examples. A lot of retailers today are looking for ways to uncover cost savings opportunities by tracking spend patterns or agreement compliance and utilization, or different types of items and suppliers where that you can shift to in terms of having a more intelligent or more efficient supply chain so that you can fulfill those orders. But managing risk always becomes a big issue when it comes to supplier management, right? How do you fully understand the risk and the performance of your contractual obligations? Do you have the metrics and the KPIs, the key performance indicators, that can help you understand and correlate on-time deliveries with rejected shipments and return rates, and therefore be able to understand root cause of poor supplier performance, and then maybe take corrective actions? And at the same time, do you understand completely your procure to pay process, right? can you ensure your customer satisfaction and the service level compliance throughout the whole process? And what are the factors where you can, of, if you would, weaknesses in that chain, right? Do you have the right KPIs, as I said, to easily understand all those accounts and anywhere from requisitions, purchase orders, invoices, supplier payments, all the way through fulfillment and everything that spills over to order management. So I've rattled off a lot of typical key performance indicators or metrics that suppliers, I'm sorry, that retailers are looking to understand with respect to their supply chain, and then use those to combine them and project them as to what could happen. What could my risk levels be? How efficient am I doing this? And that's where the challenges lie, because having the right technology to be able to do what I just rattled off is very important and usually becomes the bottleneck. So hopefully this gives some concrete examples, Michael, about what we're hearing and what we're referring to and what we're working on with all of these organizations.
Yeah, I would agree, Jose, and I would also again bring it out into the conversation that at the end of the day, if we're not satisfying consumer need states, then we've missed our purpose. And so the closed loop, let's let's just assume that it's not a closed loop. Then it doesn't have to be just about I make and you sell, but who do we sell to at the end of the day? And so you brought it up earlier, sentiment analysis is an example, unstructured data. The customer will tell us what they want. It's become almost urban lore, right? To use an example, that we were running out of toilet paper. Well, we were never really running out of toilet paper. There was a moment, a flashpoint when enough product wasn't getting to the shelf and where consumers were seeing some of those out of stock conditions, and then they were panicking. They were saying, oh my gosh. And it's interesting that it would be toilet paper that everybody focuses on, because it was actually true for protein and paper towels and for a whole host of products in a grocery store. So what happened was we had a flywheel, something between the perception of the lack and our ability to fulfill needs. And frankly, if it wasn't just about making sure that warehouses were full and back rooms had enough product and the shelves were being allocated, merchandised more quickly, then the consumer might not have panicked. But what we might have done isn't just communicate between the trading partners, but to actually communicate with the shopper, to have an authentic conversation, which is, you know what, it looks like we're out of stock. Tomorrow we're going to have plenty. If you need what you need, I'd only ask you to take what you need for the next 24 hours. Then come back tomorrow. We're going to have plenty of everything you require. By the way, if you don't want to come back tomorrow, I'll just ship it to your house. Tell me what you need, and I'll make sure that and everything else that we're aware of by your frequent patterns will get to you. And I think that this is what the industry, to your point earlier, Brian, is starting to come to terms with, that the business model of manufacturing to retailer isn't sufficient. That the business model has to be much more proactive in recognizing who the shopper is, what they need, and when they want it. And if we use that combination of knowledge and awareness, we can inform upstream sufficient to ensure that these out of stock conditions, whatever they might be, aren't the end of the day. They're just another day in the life cycle.
Something that came to mind,
That's
Michael, as you were speaking, was I want to make one last short comment, Brian, was what came to mind was that also many of these organizations, when they're trying to plan what, as I said earlier, what could happen and what's going on, combine these two elements of understanding their consumers and understanding how they can fulfill those orders, they realize that they need not only the right technology, but the right processes in-house to build 30, 60, and 90-day plans. And because of the seasonality that we experience in the retail industry, regardless of the individual area or sector that an organization is in, all of them seem to be focused on, now we need this because changes are so sudden that we have to focus on this. And they may change radically from your 30 to 60 to 90-day plans. You may have to focus on building demand and then executing a little bit later. So a combination of these strategies, to use your terminology, the omni retail intelligence, so that they can understand, what do I focus on earlier? How do I, start to generate that demand? How do I execute and fulfill that across these periods? Becomes or has become very critical. That's also top of mind, as what we hear from all retailers.
No, that's very insightful, particularly when you put it in the 30, 60, 90 context. I One of the things I think done right is that if we're concentrating on the supply demand match, one, the conversation's a bigger conversation than what it maybe it's been in the past. It's more about the product. I mean, it's been about the product. Now it needs to be about the whole supply chain. But I think one of the keys is doing the testing of the plan, which is the what if questions, if you will. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. And you test the limits of the plan. What if this customer goes south or the supplier goes south? What happens? But then also the likely scenarios that might occur. But you also brought up a good point, is that in doing the 30, 60, 90, if you've really done the intelligence or the omni-intelligent sort of view, hopefully it positions people so that they've got those contingencies in place. In other words, they can get to the I've got to go with what I have, and so what are my alternatives? And if we've got that data and we've got the intelligence and we can put that together, coming up with the alternatives might be a real benefit of having those analytics in place. What is that? Hey, alternative because I got surprised. Okay. There's always a surprise. Let's put it that way. I don't think that'll ever change, at least to some degree, but hopefully we can minimize it. But being able to maybe, rely on the analytics to guide me a little bit, I think might be a point here. So does that make sense?
Absolutely. You said it very well. That's exactly what we hear. And that's, as I said earlier, very top of mind for retailers today.
Good. Well, listen, on the supply chain, that's maybe all I have. But what I do want to do is I think it's worth that we take a look at the benefits of those that have adopted Omni Intelligence, and I think the numbers are pretty, I'd say, impressive. And I'm going to turn this over to Sarah, let her talk through it. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, thus far, we've talked a lot about the what, meaning the state of the retail industry and the need for omni intelligence. We've talked about the how and the different ways to implement analytics in fulfillment, procurement, customer experience, operations, all different areas of the retail organization. But what really we want to get at underneath all of this is the why and why your organization should invest in omni intelligence. So, in our data, we looked at all the organizations that are currently leveraging Omni Intelligence, and we found that they were more dynamic in addressing customer needs and far more likely to see improvements in key business results. They're able to address customer needs more swiftly and decrease response time to customer requests. This has resulted in a more effortless experience for customers and reducing the customer effort score, as well as increasing customer satisfaction. And in turn, happier customers are more likely to spend more over the course of their relationship, which has contributed to the greater customer lifetime value and annual revenue for those Omni Intelligence users. Annual revenues also affected by the efficiency advantages of artificial intelligence for the Omni Intelligence users. So, artificial intelligence is key in uncovering inefficiencies in processes, which increases the speed to get customer needs addressed, as well as identify patterns in customer behavior to quickly get buyers what they need and when they need it, and maybe even before they realize they need it. This really drives down operating costs and thus increases profit margins for customer. So, why for Omni Intelligence? It's really about keeping customers happy and keeping them coming back. Customers rely more on retailers this time of year with Christmas and Thanksgiving right around the corner, and retailers need to have the technologies in place to meet their expectations and deliver what they need most on time. The numbers indicate a fairly strong value proposition for retailers that have adopted omni-intelligent technology enablers. But Michael and Jose, I just want to get your thoughts on the value of omni-intelligent retail.
Yeah, I think I'll give you an example that is very top of mind that I was discussing with Michael earlier. That was quite interesting because it's very, very realistic to what you just described, especially at this time of the year. And I'll see if I can articulate it in the right way. Michael, please chime in. So traditionally, we've had retailers, to use one specific example, focus on the needs of some of their segments of consumers, for example, Gen Zers, and focus on health and wellness type of not just products, but trends and help them through. Help themselves, I mean, the retailers, to get to those buyers and also appeal to them and use influencers, to get to that segment of the population. But now we're seeing a lot of differences, as you guys had outlined before, because there's also very significant purchasing power in other demographics. Perhaps their parents or their grandparents, right? From those Gen Zers. And what have some retailers that have been very smart and intelligent and had the technology to adapt quickly been doing? We've seen in the retail industry a whole sort of trends in terms even of M&A regarding in-home health care, whether they're devices, technologies, and so forth. And what does this have to do with what I just mentioned? Is that some of these retailers, and keep in mind, this is not only for the big box ones, this is not for the big and powerful, because technology is a very important equalizer. And now many organizations are able to implement this and appeal to all of those other segments of the market by adjusting the types of products that they're focusing on and providing them more like in-home healthcare products and services as part of their lineup, as part of their offerings, and also simplify and make it a lot easier for them to implement BOPIS, right? Buy online and pick up in store, and focus on returns and making returns a lot easier. So if you're able to combine all of these elements together, you can have a very diverse type of strategy to not only focus on what is important for different segments of the population, how you can influence them and become top of mind for in terms of what you can offer, but at the same time track the whole process in a more easy and understandable and simplified way, so that you could get and meet your forecasts for demand. So I thought this was a very interesting element of having now implementing dual types or more of the strategies, but that are starting to interconnect. In the past, these strategies by segment or types of users were completely independent. Not anymore, because the changes that we see are and the changes in buying patterns and buying online and how much information you obtain before you click that purchase button or you put something on your shopping cart is radical. It's statistics call for over 70-80% of the information you need to buy is done completely online by yourself. So all of a sudden we see this confluence of different strategies that in the past were completely independent. And of course, that implies that you have to have the right technology platform in order to be able to do that. So any comments on that, Michael? What have you been seeing?
Well, you touched on a lot of things there, Jose, but I think there's something else to say, and I intimated this a little earlier. The evolution of the digitization of commerce, in a sense, was tangent to the evolution of a greater awareness among consumers themselves. We talk about things like health and wellness and sustainability and animal husbandry. I heard just a few years ago the chief marketing officer for a major retailer say, and I won't name the retailer, but we are committed every day to providing more information about the products we provide our customers, that they should know everything that's around them everything that goes on them, everything that goes inside of them. This commitment to transparency has now informed not just what we buy, when, and how, but what we think about those products and what we think about those companies that provide them. And I think that we must take that into consideration too as our supply chains evolve, that these were in some respects static models for procuring raw commodities, making finished goods, shipping and delivering them to the point of sale where consumers could make their purchase decisions. But there's something far more far more important than even just that now, that during this period of the COVID, people have had to take stock of the world that they live in and the lives that they're living. People are paying attention in slightly different ways than they might have beforehand. And I don't know that we're gonna go back to anything that was the way it was. That the advances that are taking place, to use your word, Jose, this confluence of technology as enabler and awareness as decision maker, and all of those things are coming into focus to evolve a new way to serve.
I like to use an analogy, and I'll just make a short last comment on this. Is if you realize that all of us as consumers in our personal lives have a tremendous wealth of information available to us on our mobile devices, at home, but sometimes at work we don't have the same. And there lies that difference. So if we start to think about how much information we can provide our consumers and our buyers, do we have the same for our organization across the supply chain and combined with the understanding of your consumer? If you see differences, then that's when you start to, that's where you should start to look into how does your technology platform help you do that? Do you have that complete omni-intelligent channel connected, combined? Those differences are the ones that are making a big impact between those that are best in class and the rest. Sarah, any other final comments from the information you've gathered from the market?
Yeah, well, I just want to reiterate the importance of keeping in tune with your consumers, as you and Michael both just mentioned, around the importance of having the information to know what they're looking for, when they're looking for it, and being able to meet those needs. With it being such a dynamic environment, with all the consumers looking for different ways to interact with retailers, different ways to get things delivered, always having, keeping a pulse on the market and being able to have that visibility and the analytics to back up the decision making is really key. I'll turn it back to Brian for some closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great discussion. Maybe just to add to that a little bit is it sounds like most of the elements are there, or the technology is there. You bring up a good point, Jose. For example, it wasn't until consumers demanded it, or let's say at the workplace, people were used to clicking on their phone and making booking a trip, and very automated, and very on the fly kind of capabilities. And until they started complaining about, I don't want to be filling out my expense reports and the tedious, curmudgeon type of system I used to have. And guess what? Things changed, okay, as a result. And now most companies have adopted, literally snapped a picture of the receipt, etc. We've all seen some of that. But I use that as an illustration of the tools may be there, but maybe not in the right hands, in the right form, in the right place yet. But the fundamentals of the technology are there. And the other big point I think I see is um, the application, or the confluence, maybe is a better word, of tying the unstructured with the structured, and so that we move the conversation forward instead of the four walls. It gets beyond that. Michael, back to your point, um, it, beyond how we've had a model up to this point, got to expand the model. We can't keep doing the same thing over. We can improve it, no issue with that, and always good to do that. But we need to expand it and modify it to some degree. So, just one last thought is I'd like to ask you guys any closing thoughts. After give you a chance to sort of digest a little bit that you want to leave the audience with. Um, Michael, Jose, any last what's that nugget you wanna tell them?
Go ahead, Jose.
I'll be brief. To net it out from the technology perspective is, as you said, Brian, most organizations have a lot of applications and tools that generate a lot of data. The key question to ask yourselves is, do you have the ability to combine all of this data and put it in the right form for your decision makers, for your sourcers, for your product managers, for your executives, so that they can understand what happened, but also what's going to happen in a 30, 60-day rolling type of model. Are you able to do that today? Are you able to do that easily without a legion of data engineers and data scientists? Does your analytics platform work in that way without you having to stitch different tools, without you having to put all of this together manually? Does it work seamlessly in a cloud infrastructure? All of these are very important questions that I want to leave you with, because that will help you then set up the conversation internally as to how can you achieve this new level of what we're hearing from Brian and Sarah are the top performers. Michael.
Yeah, as I reflect on the industry, which has evolved over something over 100 years. I mean, retail and consumer goods, such as it was the model was mass manufacturing, mass distribution, mass marketing, and we're coming through to a new period now when we talk about things like not just one to many, but one to few, and even one to one. And so the change requirement for manufacturers and retailers isn't just to make a lot of stuff and sell a lot of stuff. It's to actually understand who I am at core. And it's causing us to reflect upon the business models, which frankly served us very well for 100 years. There's no question about that. But those incremental approaches that got us to this moment, and this moment now reflexively we realize is brought us to a period of, if not crisis, awakening, that the industry itself has to realize that it needs to be more than the sum of its interconnected pieces and parts. That's going to cause a challenge. We're literally at a point of inflection where corporations are going to have to rethink those models, which is going to challenge all of us, right? So all of the core processes for manufacturing and trade promotion management, and supply chain intelligence, merchandising and promotion, all the rest of these things are coming into focus. Not something that we keep and do a little bit better with, but maybe we need to re-examine for a new era. I would ask, and I ask myself every day, what are we in the business of? What is our purpose? What's next? And what comes next after next? And as leaders, effectively helping to foster change in our organizations, it's incumbent upon us to challenge the presumptions of the past that we might build for a better future that ultimately serves not just today's but tomorrow's consumer.
Look, I really appreciate the closing comments, and I think we'll leave it here at that, and maybe with the thought that the picture we've got up is ultimately where we all want to get to in terms of putting smiles on faces at the end of the day. So I'll close with that. I want to thank our panel, Sarah, my colleague, and Jose and Michael from Oracle. And David, I turn it back over to you.
With that, we'll conclude our webinar for today. I want to thank our speakers for sharing their research, insights, and recommendations with us, and special thanks to Oracle for making this webinar possible. Please reach out using the contact information on your screen if you have any questions. We hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you for attending.